Okay, so first things first, we're going to talk about circles. So we're going to talk about circumference and area of circles. Um, so let's get into that. Circumference is the distance around the circle. So circumference is how big is the area on the outside of the circle. So it's the distance. It's the distance around the circle. Okay. So again, circumference is the area around on the outside of the circle. Okay. Let's review some definitions first. Diameter. Diameter is from one side of the circle to the other. So this dotted line. Diameter goes from one side of the circle straight across to the other. Okay. And how you find the diameter, you use this formula. C for circumference is equal to pi times diameter. Okay, so you'll see for this unit, you'll see 1, 2, 3. Okay, on this first line, you always rewrite the formula that you're using. So circumference is equal to pi times diameter. Okay, again, diameter is from one edge of the circle to the other. Okay, and now in this problem, we know that my diameter is 10 inches. So we're going to plug 10 in for diameter, for D. Okay, so we have circumference is equal to pi times 10 now. So in your calculator, or on your calculator, there's a button that looks just like this. It's the pi button. If you don't have the pi button or you can't find it, that's okay. We can use pi is the same thing as 3.14. Okay, pi is the same thing as 3.14. So if you use either, you're just going to have to be careful when rounding. Okay, so either should work, the pi button. So the pi button on your calculator or 3.14. I'm going to be using this. If you use this, you'll just have to be careful with rounding, okay? Because our rounding might be a little different. So I'm going to type in my calculator 10 times pi. So I do 10 times, and then I click the pi button and hit enter. And now I get that my circumference is equal to, I'm going to round this to the 10th place, so 31.4. And I always include my units here, which is inches. Okay, so circumference is, again, pi times diameter. Diameter is from one edge of the circle to the other, and you use the pi button or 3.14 to find that. Now, you might not always be able to find or given the diameter. You might be given something called the radius. The radius is half the circle. The radius is from the middle of the circle to the edge. So the radius is from the middle of the circle to the edge. And just some information, if to find the radius, you take 1/2 of the diameter. Okay, so your radius is half of your diameter because it's from the middle to the edge. That's your radius. Okay, so since this is only half my circle, this is my radius then. My formula to find circumference is circumference is equal to 2 times pi times r. Okay, so it's twice the radius times pi. Okay, because there should be 2 radii, and that'll give me my diameter. So that's why it's 2 times your radius. Okay, so let's plug that in. Again, this 1 is always our formula, equals 2 pi r. Okay, so now we're going to start plugging some numbers in. in the second one. So the 2 pi always stays. And now my radius is that 3. So it's 2 pi times 3. And you could just type that in your calculator. So 2 times pi times 3. And that'll give you 18.8, or if you do, 18.8. Which, and then we always have to include our units, our inches. Okay, so there's the formula for circumference. Let's look at area. Area is the inside of the circle. Area is how big of the inside, whereas remember, circumference was the outside of that circle. So area is how big the inside is, so the inside distance. So area is the inside distance of a circle. Okay. So now, again, we're going to use the radius or the diameter here. Okay, so 2 formulas. So the area using the radius is area for area equals pi times my radius squared. So how I do this squared thing here, this is on my calculator. There'll be a button that says x squared. You're going to put in your radius, so in this case 3. So my calculator, I would do 3 and then press the x squared button, and that'll make it 3 squared. Or if something's squared, that's really saying 3 times 3. So you could do pi times 3 times 3. And that'll give you the same thing as if you do pi times 3 and press that x squared button. Okay, so let's first start by putting in our formula. A equals pi r squared. Okay, so now we need to do area equals our pi stays. Our radius is 3, and we're squaring that. So again, 3 squared is the same thing as 3 times 3. So I would plug that into my calculator. And I get that there's not a third line here because it got cut off while copying. It should be what your answer is. So when you do pi times 3, you should get 28.3. And because it's area, our units are also squared. Okay, diameter is a little bit more complicated, and therefore the formula is a little bit more complicated. The formula is area equals 1/4 pi times my diameter squared. So we have this 1/4 in front, and that's the big difference. Okay, so again, this first line is always where we write the formula. Area equals 1/4 pi diameter squared. Remember, our diameter goes from one side to the other. So in this case, our diameter is 8. So that's what I'm plugging in here. So my area equals 1/4 pi times 8 squared. Okay, so let's plug that in our calculator. So I'm going to do 1/4 times pi times 8 times 8, because that's what 8 squared is. When I do that, rounding to the nearest tenths place, I get 50.3. So again, I did 1/4 times pi times 8 times 8. And that gives me 50.3. And again, we use our units, which is inches, and it's got to be squared. Okay, so that's the basic breakdown of the formulas. So let's start putting this into practice. All right, so we're going to do these first two on the page. We're going to find circumference and area of each. Okay, so we have to find our circumference, which, using the diameter, the formula is pi times diameter. Using the diameter to find area is 1/4 pi times diameter squared. Okay, so we know that the diameter is from one side to the other side of the circle. And it gives us our diameter in this problem. So really all we're doing is plugging it in for D. Okay, so make sure you're using your calculator. Again, if you use the pi button or 3.14, your answer is going to be a little different depending on which one you use because of rounding. I'm going to use the pi button. Okay, so that's what I've got going on. So let's plug this in. Circumference equals pi times 7.9. So in my calculator, pi times 7.9, when I plug that in and I round to the 10th place, I get roughly 24.8. Always make sure you label your answer, centimeters. All right, plugging 7.9 in for D for area. Your area is equal to 1/4 times pi times 7.9 squared, which, remember, 7.9 squared is the same thing as 7.9 times 7.9. Okay, so let's plug that in. 1/4 times pi times 7.9 squared is roughly, if you round to the 10th place, 49.0 or 49.1, depending on what you used. Okay, and then we label centimeters, and because it's area, we have it squared. Okay, so now let's look at it using the radius, which, remember, radius is from the middle to the edge. It's halfway through the circle. It's half of the diameter. So our formula is going to be a little different. So our circumference formula is C equals 2 pi r. And our area formula is pi r squared. Okay. So let's start plugging in 7.3 for r. All right, so we have circumference 2 times pi times 7.3. That's what we're plugging in our calculator. So 2 times pi times 7.3. When you do that, that should give you roughly 45, again, rounding to the 10th place, the first decimal place, 0.9 centimeters. Okay, area equals pi times your radius, which is 7.3 squared. All right, let's plug that in. Pi times 7.3 squared is roughly 167.4 centimeters squared. Always remember to label and label correctly. So you may be thinking, do I need to know these formulas? No, because you're at home, and so you should have your notes with you when you take your knowledge checks, hopefully. Okay, so you don't need to memorize these formulas. I can give you, or I will upload a sheet of all the formulas you may need. Okay, so I'll give you one of those as well. Okay, so let's keep on going. I want you to do these next two. So right underneath, I want you to do those next two. So I want you to pause right now and work on those. All right, so hopefully you worked on those. Here's the answers for the first one. Here's the answers for the second one. Again, if you got a little bit something different because of rounding, that's okay. All right, so hopefully you got something similar. And if you have questions, make sure you message